Zambian President Michael Sata dies in London. President Barack Obama lauds American efforts to combat Ebola. And a former Spice Girl receives a top honor for her business smarts. Africa 54 starts right now.
Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. The Southern African nation of Zambia is mourning the death of President Michael Sata, who died late Tuesday in London. Mr. Sata had been undergoing treatment in the British capital for an undisclosed illness. He was 77. President Sata's health had been a concern since June after he traveled to Israel for medical treatment and then did not make any public appearances for 3 months. Mr. Sata had led Zambia since winning an election in 2011 that ended the 20-year rule of the Movement for Multi-Party Democracy Party. Sata pledged to fight corruption and help Zambia's poor, while also working to improve working conditions at mines in Africa's second biggest copper-producing country. Mr. Sata was known for his sharp wit and fiery speeches, which earned him the nickname King Cobra. Zambian Vice President Guy Scott has been named the interim leader. Defense Minister Edgar Lungu says the country will hold a presidential election to choose a permanent successor to Sata within 3 months. Well, Africa 54's Paul Ndiho recently returned from Zambia, and he joins us now. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Vince. How are you?
I'm fine. Now, you spent some time in Zambia at a time when actually the president was absent from the country. What was the mood like in the country?
It was kind of a mixed feeling. On the streets, people were talking about what could happen when the president eventually passes on. Some people were also saying that, you know what, he's going to recover. And pretty much most people didn't know what was really happening behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. Which is very typical in African nations, that people don't really know what's happening to the president. Now, it so happened that actually, by coincidence, among the things you did is visit a very interesting place. Can you just share that with us?
Yes, I happened to be at the mausoleum where all the presidents are sitting, and people who have died in office, especially the Zambian presidents, are buried or are going to be buried. For example, there is this place in the heart of Lusaka called the National Burial Site for the presidents of Zambia. It's right in front of the army headquarters. So that's where I suspect they are going to bury President Sata.
Was there any conversation of an anticipated passing on of the president? Were they kind of in a preparatory mode?
It's ironic that you say that because as I was talking to one of the curators of the mausoleum, we talked about the potential death of President Sata. And he said, you know what, if he dies, his burial site is going to be right here. This is where they're going to bury him. They've already buried their former President Levi Mwanawasa, Chiluba, who also died recently. They buried him there. So all the other presidents who who will serve as Zambia's presidents, if they die, they will be buried there.
It's kind of notable that since President Kaunda, the first president after independence of that country from the British, everybody other than I think one has died. I mean, President Kaunda is alive, and only one former president.
Lupia Banda is also alive.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things they talk about these leaders, especially for the great Kenneth Kaunda, they say that this man is still in a very good, healthy condition. He exercises every day for about 2 hours. Maybe that's one of the reasons why he's still alive today.
Yes. And very quickly, in terms of the political kind of jostling and kind of debates, what is the situation like? Zambia is known to be very peaceful, but how is it now?
That's right, indeed. As of today, I think they announced that Vice President Scott has taken over as acting president. Generally, Zambians are very, very peaceful people. When they were even talking about, before the death, I interacted with a lot of people on the streets, in bars, and they were talking about how there's going to be a seamless transition when President Sata passes on.
And it so happened that actually just about this time, the Zambians had been working on a new constitutional draft, and that is, it's been presented actually recently. You did a story on that.
Yeah, that's right, Vincent. Zambian government has released its final draft constitution to the public as Zambians reflect on 50 years of freedom, from colonial rule. The Southern African nation has been fairly stable for most of its post-independence, with an economy recently classified by the World Bank as lower middle income. Zambia's ruling party, the Patriotic Front, says it's committed to giving Zambians a people-driven constitution, and it remains committed to giving the Zambians a constitution that will stand the test of time. Andrew Ntewewe, the president of the Young African Leaders Initiative, whose organization has been pushing for reforms, has played an important role in the draft constitution process. He says historically, any time Zambians want to come up with a constitution, it has to do with elections.
We are not looking for a constitution simply for the 2016 elections. We believe that elections are very important because they form the bedrock of democratic governance. But elections alone are not the entire constitution. So they're simply a component of the constitution.
Plans to overhaul the constitution were announced shortly after Michael Sata was elected president in 2011, as part of a series of steps in his top-to-bottom review of the country's policies. However, critics accuse the government of deliberately stalling the process in the interests of those in power. Others say the constitutional reform process has been slow to gather momentum because of a lack of consensus building from the various stakeholders.
I want to believe that as much as elections are very important, we can do this process without political expediency. We can do this process by seeking stakeholder involvement and consensus building.
In recent years, Zambia has enjoyed political stability and has an annual economic growth rate of 7%. The World Bank now classifies it as a lower middle income nation rather than a low income, meaning its gross national income per person has risen above $1,000. But Africa's second largest copper producer, home to 14.5 million people, is still struggling with poverty and high unemployment. Zila Milupi, a social entrepreneur and co-founder of a non-profit called Winners Circle, says young Zambians have a role to play in solving the unemployment problem.
If young people take the bull by the horns and start to believe actually in the potential that they have, if we start to be more open-minded and if we start to foster creativity and risk-taking, if we make deliberate efforts to do those things and to really cultivate an entrepreneurship culture, I think that that really could be a significant growth sector for Zambia.
To get a sense of what Zambians think about their 50th independence anniversary, I spoke to a couple of residents on the streets of the capital, Lusaka.
The economy has changed. We have developed to a certain extent, but we have not reached where we are supposed to be.
We have enjoyed peace, we've enjoyed harmony, we've enjoyed a lot of good things.
President Michael Sata's death comes at a time when the Southern African nation is celebrating 50 years of independence. Meanwhile, Zambia's sometimes rocky relationship with China is now steadily growing. A drive through Lusaka and other cities shows a country on the move, with huge Chinese infrastructure projects spurring development.
Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have to say, excellent reporting.
Thank you.
Well, turning now to the Ebola crisis. Because of the size and seriousness of the outbreak, VOA and BBC are collaborating in order to give audiences in Africa and around the world access to the best information and content available. In this report, BBC's Gabriel Gethouse tells us about the risks frontline workers are facing in Liberia, the worst hit country, with at least 4,800 reported deaths from Ebola.
The sight of an ambulance means only one thing. Almost 50 new cases of Ebola are reported every day here in a city of 1 million people. Ambulance workers are on the front lines. Laureen and her crew have been called in to collect a woman who's been taken sick. It's extremely dangerous work. So the ambulance team are taking as many precautions as they can. They're getting into these white suits, plastic aprons, the hoods up, goggles and face masks, because when they go into these homes, the woman in there, we understand, is unconscious, and it's when people are in that state that they're most contagious. Her terrified neighbours isolated her inside her home for days before calling in the ambulance. Excuse me, there's a tear in your suit. Any physical contact with the patient's bodily fluids could be a death sentence. Obsessive attention to detail can save your life. Laureen allows us to fit a small camera to her head before she goes in. The scene she's about to witness is one of horror, but for her it's a scene that's become an everyday reality. She enters the cramped home. On the floor lies what appears to be an elderly woman. The patient herself is now the biggest danger, an incubator riddled with the virus. She needs to be isolated fast. The neighbours say the patient has been ill for weeks and that she's only 38 years old. One woman tells us she's the patient's housemate. Are you still going to live in that same house now?
Yes, I'm in the same house.
You're living in the same house?
Yes.
She is scared, she says. She'll clean the place, but she has nowhere else to go. And this is how it spreads. In cramped neighbourhoods where poverty and lack of sanitation fuel the outbreak. Gabriel Gatehouse, BBC News in Monrovia.
That was BBC's Gabriel Gatehouse reporting. Be sure to join us again tomorrow when we'll have part 2 of our collaborative report with BBC on Ebola. US President Barack Obama says no other nation is doing as much as the United States to contain and ultimately stop the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Mr. Obama said Tuesday the U.S. Disaster Assistance Response Team has increased the number of Ebola treatment units and burial teams and has expanded the pipeline of medical personnel and equipment since August, as well as launched an aggressive educational campaign.
So the point is that this disease can be contained, it will be defeated, progress is possible, but we're going to have to stay vigilant. And we've got to make sure that we're working together. We have to keep leading the global response. America cannot look like it is shying away because other people are watching what we do. And if we don't have a robust international response in West Africa, then we are actually endangering ourselves here back home.
Samantha Powers, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, expressed a similar sentiment Tuesday while visiting Liberia, one of 3 West African nations that has been plagued by the Ebola outbreak.
President Obama has said many, many times that the best way to address our fears in the United States is to deal with the problem at its source and to prevent the spread of the epidemic, reverse the epidemic, and ultimately end the epidemic here. And in order for us to do that, we need to flood the zone and have health workers, our forces, our aid workers, and the broader international community contribute. So we don't want to do something that will interfere with that.
Mr. Obama said policies on quarantines and isolation of health workers who have had contact with Ebola patients should not be such that they discourage Americans from helping fight the disease. A number of states, including New York and New Jersey, have issued mandatory quarantine rules for medical personnel returning to the United States from West Africa. Well, Todd Moss, former top U.S. diplomat for West Africa, currently serves as the Chief Operating Officer and Senior Fellow at the Center for Global Development with a focus on U.S.-Africa relations and financial issues facing sub-Saharan Africa. He's also an author, and in his debut fiction novel, The Golden Hour, Mali's president has been overthrown in a coup, a U.S. senator's daughter has been kidnapped in Timbuktu, and a violent new jihadist cell has been discovered in the desert. In a recent interview with Moss, he talked about what inspired him to write the book.
Well, I worked for Secretary Condoleezza Rice in the State Department. And when I left government, I wanted to write a story about what is American foreign policy making like in the 21st century? What happens when there's a crisis on the other side of the world? And what happens inside the State Department, inside the White House Situation Room, that leads us to make certain kinds of political decisions that impact people around the world? And I wanted to tell that story through an African incident because Africa is becoming more important to U.S. foreign policy, and I wanted to use that as an example.
One thing I noticed about your main character is that, while he thinks he knows everything about how things work and he has all these great connections and friends, he gets a surprise of his life when he realizes that things move and shift in so many other directions than he had anticipated. Was this based on personal experience, knowing that you were at one time actually serving in that region of West Africa, where so many things have happened over the years?
I tried to draw on a couple of pieces that I lived through. One is as an outsider coming into the U.S. government, trying to figure out how does it work. The main character has to do that. He's an Amherst College professor who's dropped into the State Department to run a new crisis reaction unit, and he has to figure out how do you operate inside something like the U.S. government. But also, I've been working on Sub-Saharan Africa for 25 years, and I've been working on a country like Nigeria for many years. And what I've come to realize is the more I learn about a place like Nigeria or a place like Ghana or Zimbabwe, the more I realize how little I really understand it as an outsider. And so I wanted the main character also to be, he's an intelligent person who's trying to put the pieces together, but he realizes that he doesn't have all the information he needs to make good decisions. He's got to keep digging deeper to try to get at the real truth.
While this is a work of fiction, one remarkable thing is that actually it's about a coup, or it does happen when a coup takes place in Mali. Mm-hmm. Now, our viewers need to know that you wrote the book before an actual coup happened in Mali. What did you know as you were writing this book?
Well, the original basis for the story was the 2008 coup in Mauritania. I actually went to Nouakchott to meet with General Aziz a few days after the coup, and I used that as the central plot for this story. But I thought not that many people outside of Mauritania know where Nouakchott is, whereas everybody, and virtually all Americans, which is the principal audience for the book initially, have heard of Timbuktu. So I put the story in Mali. And about 6 weeks after I finished the book, of course, ATT was overthrown in a coup in Bamako.
One of the things I always get concerned about is when an author who is not a native of a particular country is the risk of perhaps misrepresenting the country, misrepresenting the people. And what have you done, or how have you ensured that when a Malian takes this book and reads, they would say, yeah, that's about my country?
I tried very hard not to fall into cliches. There are Nigerian characters in there who are heroes. They're not the corrupt character. A lot of the bad guys are Americans. I tried to mix it up to make it a little bit unpredictable. The way that I dealt with your particular issue, though, is that the character himself, Judd Riker, the main character, he struggles with this same issue. Is he projecting his own views onto this foreign country that maybe he knows a little but not a lot? And that's really something that I, as a foreign policy analyst, struggle with all the time. I try to just make that explicit. It's, I think, ultimately unresolvable.
Well, Todd Moss is the author of the new thriller, The Golden Hour. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, a young Nairobi tech innovator is on track in the security business. Stay with us.
I am Sheikh Asali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
Welcome back. A 24-year-old technology innovator in Nairobi has invented a tracking device that monitors and secures cars. He has also developed what he claims is the most robust audiovisual surveillance system yet. As Lenny Rovaga reports, his innovations are offering alternative security solutions.
This is Nairobi, the capital of East Africa's largest economy. But beneath the glitz and glamour of a growing economy lies an uncomfortable truth. Crime here has been rising at an alarming rate. A new report by the Nairobi Metropolitan Crime Observatory notes that carjacking is on the rise with an average of 10 cars stolen each day. Meet 24-year-old Kelvin Macharia, an innovator who not only identified the problem but saw an opportunity. Macharia is now the CEO at Sunrise Tracking, offering security solutions. In 2012, with just $300 from his savings, he improved upon a tracking device to alert car owners to the location of their vehicles from the comfort of their computer desktops or mobile phones.
It also acts as a security measure, whereby in case there is theft, you can always be able to recover the vehicle by the help of your handset.
Kelvin's is a story of determination. In 2009, he failed to make it to university, but this setback didn't deter his ambition. Initially, he used locally available material to build prototypes until he perfected his design. He now outsources production for his trucker to China. Today, his company is worth more than $100,000 and boasts of a client base of more than 100 companies. Tony Wanga is one of Macharia's clients. He has 3 minibus taxis in a city where the public transportation sector has been the biggest target of car thieves. He bought 3 truckers for $250 each.
As an investor, you need to ensure that your asset is safe. So how safe? You have to ensure that it's insured, and at the same time a tracker is installed. Once a tracker is installed, you can easily do your work from the safety of the office. You can track your vehicle, know it is real time. So it's so practicable.
Macharia continues to develop better security products. His latest innovation is a wireless CCTV device he claims is tamper-proof. The wireless security camera seeks to offer more robust surveillance by eliminating cables and storing data for longer periods. Macharia hopes his innovations offer his clients peace of mind from random crimes. Lenny Ruvaga for VOA News, Nairobi.
While still to come on Africa 54, picking the perfect pet costume for Halloween. But first, a recap of Wednesday's headlines.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. Zambian President Michael Sata has died at the age of 77 after seeking medical treatment in London. In Burkina Faso, protesters rally in the capital to protest President Blaise Compaore's attempt to extend his 27-year term in office. And members of the World Bank Group have pledged more than $8 billion in aid to help develop countries in the Horn of Africa. Finally, in Somalia, the National University reopens for students after 23 years of being abandoned in Mogadishu. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Well, it's Comic-Con Russian style. Hundreds of sci-fi, anime, comic and manga lovers, many dressed as their favorite characters, descended on the Russian city of St. Petersburg. One of the highlights was a colorful cosplay competition with around 700 participants. Cosplay is a fantasy trend in which fans dress up as a character from a movie, book or video game, and it's gaining in popularity. But if you couldn't make it to Russia, don't worry. Comic and sci-fi conventions can be found all over the world. Well, next up, with Halloween only days away, pet lovers in the U.S. are on the lookout for the perfect costume for their four-legged fur babies. Dressing up as a sailor or even as a Yoda from the Star Wars series means everyone's beloved pet can share in the Halloween fun. Well, this year, a record number of Americans are expected to buy Halloween costumes for themselves, their children, and their pets. Now, the National Retail Federation estimates that around $350 million will be spent on pet costumes. According to one pet store manager, this year's hot costume trends include Star Wars and Game of Thrones. And finally, from Spice Girl to fashion icon, a top honor for Victoria Beckham. Now, the singer-turned-designer has been voted the UK's top entrepreneur by Management Top Today magazine. The wife of soccer star David Beckham and mother of four is the owner of her own fashion label. Her collections have been shown worldwide, and last month she opened her first store in London's Mayfair. Now, Victoria's clothing line has gone from £1 million in sales a year to a whopping £30 million in just 5 years. Her designs are now sold in 45 countries, and that is what is trending today. Well, that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC. That is Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night. Welcome.
Welcome to the Voice of America's Newswords.
Here is a story that has to do with defects or problems with cars.
Listen for the word that means to take back something. Recall.
They had meetings over this defect. They shared complaints over this defect. Yet there was no investigation by the government and no recall by General Motors until 10 years later.
Recall. It is a word that means to ask people officially to return something.
In our story, there were major problems with some General Motors cars. The man says the U.S. government and the car company took too long to issue a recall, so the cars could be fixed.
Now, when you hear the word recall, your American English will be good enough to know what this news word means.